Hello and welcome to Eternal Durdles. I'm your host, Zach Clark, and with me as always, Phil Blackman. Phil, how's it going, man?
Bro, it's going good. It's going well. It's going great. It's going grand. How are you doing?
I'm doing good. I'm excited. So this week, you got pre-releases and then new Capenna comes out. I think we can just say from the jump, I don't think this set is going to affect Legacy in any real way.
Let me caveat that after our spoiler review, or our set review rather.
Yeah.
I've gone way higher on Ledger Shredder.
Oh yeah.
I do think that I think Ledger Shredder is a lot better than we gave it credit for. I actually think that card has more legs than we think. I don't think it's going to see play. I think it'll see like fringy play at most. But I think of, we really dunked on the set as a whole in terms of legacy playability. It was like just that graveyard hate card and that was it.
Yeah, but I mean literally, I was scrounging through. I think we picked 40 cards and really I only think there are maybe 3 or 4 that are truly legacy playable.
After we talked through it, I don't think any of them actually are going to stick, but I think that the closest one is Ledger Shredder because the combination of being able to turn on Delirium, enable graveyard shenanigans, get out of bolt range really quickly, and it's also a large flying threat that can continuously get large. But the only thing that it asks you to do is play spells.
Yeah.
And then it gives you selection to continue playing more spells. And then it will also pay off if your opponent plays spells. So altogether, it doesn't really ask much of you, and it's a 2-mana flyer that Fairy or Sprite Dragon has already shown that space can exist in the format. Right now it's priced out because there's more powerful things going on. But hey, if bans happen and the format gets a little shake-up, I could see people experimenting with it because, like we talked about, as long as DRC is in the format and DRC Bobble is a play pattern that you can play with, Ledger Shredder Bobble is a way to make it out of bolt range, make it big, draw a card, draw a second card. It's pretty good.
Yeah.
So I think that card is going to be the best card in this set, aside from that graveyard hate card, the Hearse. But that's about it.
Yeah. What was that? Unlicensed Hearse or something like that?
Unlicensed Hearse.
Yeah. I dig that card. As soon as I saw it, I was like, "Ooh, this could be the Dermo Taxi that we didn't get from Dermo Taxi was just not good enough." But I think
I think Dermo Taxi. I think we knew Dermo Taxi wasn't going to do it.
I wanted it to be, man.
I think we really liked the idea of it doing something, but we knew deep down that.
Yeah. I think Dermo Taxi's biggest pitfall is that it's you need to tap 2 creatures to make it a creature, whereas if it was just Crew X, that would be 1 creature that you could Crew X for. So I don't know.
Yeah, too many hoops.
Yeah, too many hoops, too many dudes.
Legacy, I thinking about Ledger Shredder in particular, cards that require you to do other things to make them good, never really actually get there. I can't think of any card that the only cards that actually get there for you doing other things are stuff that you would be doing anyway.
Yeah.
So that's why I like the idea of Ledger Shredder actually making it, because it's asking you to do something that you would already want to do or are already doing. So it's not asking you to actually jump through any hoops, the hoops that you're jumping through or something that you're already doing. So it's not really a hoop.
Yeah.
It's just rewarding you for doing the thing. It's like why Delve is always busted. It's it turns out I'm always going to put cards in the yard anyway.
What's the classic sale line? I'm losing money by not buying this, right?
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
That's a good way to put it.
So we say all that to say this. Let's talk about the state of Legacy and kind of I think we want to approach this episode as not so much we want these cards banned, but the format's a bit stagnant. I think we've seen plenty of Blue-Red Delver. Blue-Red Delver seems to be an issue at the present. What needs to change to make the format a bit healthier right now? And I think, unfortunately, that it's always going to come down to a ban discussion. We're not going to unban stuff, right?
Yeah, I think one thing that every ban discussion in Legacy, including whenever WotC actually talks about it, the one thing that's never actually established is what the goal of the format is. They've banned things for power level, they've banned things for diversity reasons, they've banned things for cards being oppressive. There isn't really a clear-cut, goal for the format in terms of what to actually look at for. I mean, they've banned cards for being unfun, right?
Of course, yeah.
I'm trying to think of which cards recently. Oh yeah, Top was not
Top.
banned.
Yeah.
Right? Top was not banned.
Top was not a power ban.
level
It was
reasons,
because
right?
people were sick of going to time in tournaments, right?
It was a logistics reason, right? It was like, this card is not fun to play against, therefore we don't want it in the format.
Yeah.
Deathrite Shaman, all these cards are obviously very powerful, but like Deathrite Shaman was banned for homogenization purposes.
Yeah, it was just
Renaissance
ubiquitous.
was banned for power level purposes. Underworld Breach was obviously banned for power level purposes. Like, the gambit of like why cards go is so wide that it's tough to figure out, like, when figuring out what cards should go. It just becomes about like, okay, what cards. I feel like the discussion kind of gets lost in the weeds of like, we're not all trying to get to the same goal because we don't have a stated goal for the format.
I was actually saying something so a buddy of mine just got back into Magic and he was talking to me about Modern, and I was telling him about how like the Modern ban list exists, and it's the philosophy of Modern has changed over time. Not to make this let's talk about Modern conversation, but initially Modern's philosophy was no like consistent turn 3 kills and no boogeymen from other formats, right? So that then you lose stuff like Bitter Blossom and Seething Song goes because of the former and the latter reasons, right? And Legacy doesn't really have that. And for what it's worth, Modern doesn't have that anymore either. We're not worried about previous format boogeymen anymore because the collective conscious of Extended, which is what the boogeyman we're referring to, is gone. Like nobody we know even ever played Extended at this point, let me know below if you played Extended, sure, but like let's be serious, like no one even remembers that as a format for the most part.
The Modern turn 4, like no kills before turn 4, like that's also gone too. Like decks are powerful enough that they can kill on turn 3. Like Hammer has no problems goldfishing you on turn 3.
Yeah, I think it comes down to now that there's a solid amount of interaction in the format and people know what to play to stop things. Like it's less about being a turn 3 deck and more about being a turn 3 deck that consistently wins through an opponent's play patterns, which I think is really the point of the format now.
I think I think putting a hard and fast rule on, no decks can win by this point is always going to be undercut, because then like you have to say, well, they have to be decks that can't win on by this time consistently. Yeah. But then that just means that shit like Belcher and Grishelbrand and whatever get to like sneak past what the goal of the format is, because they don't do it consistently enough. And then it's like, okay, well, how do you even debate what you deem to be consistent enough?
Yeah, because then you can argue like that's fine. Like if a deck turn 2s you occasionally, like that's life,
right? But then it's like, okay, if a deck can consistently turn 2 you, 30% of the time, okay, well the majority of the time it's not going to do that.
Yeah.
But if that averages out over your match, well then you mean to tell me every time I sit down against this match, I'm gonna get turn 2'd by it statistically. So is that not enough?
Yeah.
And then there's a whole debate on whether or not that's enough. And that's like that's what I mean when there's these kinds of discussions. There's no actual definitive target set. So everybody we can just argue past each other.
Yeah.
And
pushing that to
achieving anything,
pushing that to Legacy, I think that the lines are even more blurred.
For sure.
So you've got you've got okay. We don't want cards that make you to go to time, right? Like that's a thing. Now we realize that if it takes too long to win as a deck is concerned, they don't want that, right?
They don't want that. I mean, I think that can never actually be the crux of an argument. Like, I feel like Top is so unique in why it was banned.
Yeah.
Because like, there's nothing there. I don't think they're going to print other cards that do anything similar like that. But also, that argument of we don't want cards to push people towards time is like, okay, well, are you talking about online or in paper?
Yeah,
Because
well, it's also about
paper,
ubiquity in the format, too. Like, that, it wasn't just that the deck it took long to win with. It was that, a good portion of people were going to large in-person tournaments and making every other person in the tournament have to watch them play mirror matches. 40 minutes after the round was over, that's a problem.
Yeah, I just mean that like the biggest offender for making rounds go to time are actually fetch lands because of all the extra shuffling that they require.
And they fixed that by saying we created a whole new format where there are no fetch lands. They were
as much as I'm constantly on the side of like, yeah, fetch lands are busted and they should go. I understand that they're not going to go.
Get them out.
It's totally fine. So like, we're not going to, you know, we don't have to like go on to that. But like the thing about like the argument of a card making games go too long, unless it's like a non-deterministic combo style deck where you're just like looping for 40 minutes, but you can't actually prove a kill, like that's an issue. But in terms of cards just like taking too long to play with, that's just judges having to enforce the rules, because there's never going to be an argument for that as long as fetch lands are legal, because they're the one that like shuffling is actually the biggest offender in that regard, right? So anyway, moving on. I think that like for actually one more point on that.
Go on.
The other thing that tournaments should do, like WotC should just instate, draws are okay. It is okay for there to be draws. I think tournaments should incentivize not letting players ID.
Yeah.
But draws themselves, it's okay if players draw, and if draws are just another reasonable outcome to be had because games can draw. So get rid, like if you want to speed up tournaments, if that's the topic for a second, get rid of 5 additional turns. If once time comes in, it's time, and it's a draw. And if a player wants to concede, they can concede. And I get that there's going to be some issues in terms of... I get that there's going to be...
There's always going to be some stalling, of course.
Some players play faster than others, some stall. But in that case, because draws are then enabled, then allow for judges to actually be able to enforce slow pay warnings more aggressively, and not have it be as... Like change what the penalties are for it, so you can more freely give them in such a way where it's like if they accrue to a certain amount, it's like, okay, yeah, this person has a repetitive pattern of slow play, without the judges feeling like they're being put on the spot. But like the rounds going 20 minutes over time or whatever is because it's untimed five turns.
Yeah,
get rid of that. Just get rid of that. No, it doesn't. If a lot of times games are not even possibly decided in those 5 turns, right? Like both players understand that they can't actually win in those 5 turns, and they're just playing it out to then lay out the best case for why their opponent should concede.
Yeah,
it's like it's not worth 5. Anyway, I'm rambling.
Yeah. So well, let's do this. Let's talk about the cards that we individually think could be on the chopping block, why they're on the chopping block, and then. A total solution, I think I have in my head, I have a correct amount of cards to get the format back on track. I think you probably do too. So let's just start. Let's start with the elephant in the corner of the room, Daze.
Go for it.
I do not think you should ban Daze. I think that's crazy. But a lot of people have been talking about it, and I understand where they're coming from. I think they're incorrect. I think Daze, banning Daze is like a huge way to just like make the format much more miserable for people by making just incentivizing combo decks, so that you're going from decks that aren't super interactive with each other to decks that are completely not interactive and you're barely playing Magic the Gathering anymore.
Yeah, I'm on the opposite side of that, because I think Daze is also enabling fast combo decks to be fast combo decks. But I also think that, like, before I delve into like why I think Daze is actually the easiest offender to get out of the format for several reasons, what are the other cards that are on your list that you think should go?
Okay, cards I think probably should go. Total, or just list the cards I think we should be talking about, right?
If there's a ban list happening tomorrow, what are the cards that you think should be on it?
I would remove what's called Oro, because and I'll explain why when we get to it. Murktide Regent, and I would get rid of Ponder, and I would get rid of Expressive Iteration.
Okay, I think the ban list should be Daze.
Okay.
I think you could. I think in terms of getting the format to the point where Blue-Red Delver isn't just the S tier deck, like there are other things that you can be doing. I think Daze is the first place to go to actually make a dent in the shell of why that deck is powerful, not just cards that are powerful in that shell.
Yeah.
So I agree that Murktide is giving the deck a different axis that it otherwise doesn't have, right? It's just a big creature that only certain removal in the format can get rid of it, and it chunks a lot faster than a bunch of the other things. For expressive iteration, yes, expressive iteration is obviously cracked. It's one of the best card draw spells they've ever made, but it's also replaceable. Like, is it replaceable at the same power level? Probably not. But it is replaceable in terms of it's a card advantage engine that can be played.
Well,
Blue-Red Delver players are already starting to pilot themselves towards beating the mirror, which means more card advantage, which means that some lists have already started to adopt Predict because it works alongside DRC and the Cantrip Suite. Now, if DRC is not... So far, I haven't seen many people in the community call for a DRC ban, but DRC enables a lot of shit, and it's going to be able to enable Predict. So if we get rid of expressive iteration, the deck could exist as it is right now, swapping them for Predict, and still be quite powerful. Obviously, not as powerful. Like, it would be a kick in the shins, but it would be the same. It would be similar to Ragavan gets cut, is replaced by Delver. The deck stays functionally the same and still crushes people. I feel like it would be the same way because they recognize that, Daze being able to loop Mystic Sanctuaries to pick up a card advantage engine is actually really powerful. And, like, turns out Mystic Sanctuary also can enable Daze, or enable Predict.
Here's my gripe about not getting rid of expressive iteration. So, DRC, a problem, of course. But if we don't get rid of expressive iteration, there is literally no other reason to not play a blue-red version of Delver. You're not seeing any Sultai Delver. You're certainly not seeing any Bant Delver. Not that you really did.
So I refute that as a desirable goal.
It's to get to other flavors of Delver, yeah, for sure.
Well, here's the thing: like, if you're saying we're not seeing other flavors of this shell because this is the best thing to do in the shell, then it's like. The play patterns of whether or not you play against Grixis or Blue-Red or Rug or Bug, like there's some difference in like sideboard cards. Like, are they going for a combination of discard spells or are they going for additional fatties? Like, okay, cool. The shell of the deck is the same.
Well, my thesis here,
that's not changing.
My thesis here on why that matters is that I think the format is at its most what's the word I'm looking for? It's most healthy when there are several different Delver decks to play. And not that I'm saying that they don't take up the same portion of the meta, but when there is just one Delver deck to play, you're seeing all of the exact same cards every single time you play against that deck. And the play patterns might be the same, but you're playing Magic the Gathering. The game is a box in and of itself. So you're going to be seeing a lot of the same cards in Legacy anyhow, because we're choosing the most powerful cards. But when you have, Sultai Delver and it's doing its thing with Tombstalkers or whatever, and then you have, Rug Delver, and that deck is playing a completely different play pattern than Blue-Red Delver, because it's playing a more reactive strategy. I think that's where, I'm not saying you have to play Delver for the format to be healthy, but I'm saying that if you go to a tournament and somebody turn one plays a Delver of Secrets and they're using a volcanic island, that's fine. But if someone turn one plays a Delver of Secrets off of an island, that's a whole different game, man.
Bro, I don't mean to be the bearer of bad news. But the world that you're describing doesn't exist and hasn't existed for a long time.
It's true. That's why I'm saying, I think that's what we need to do, is move back to that world.
Here's the thing. Like, moving back to the world where Delver was still a problem back then, like whatever back then is, literally since Innistrad has been printed, there is no back then. Like, Delver has been the crux of every banning outside of top for the last decade.
Yeah.
Like, if you get rid of whatever the most recent threat or whatever the most recent card advantage is, you can siphon off the symptom, and then they'll print something else, or they'll just go to the next thing that best fulfills that role. And then because the shell remains intact and the shell is the most powerful thing you can be doing, it will continue to be the best thing. Like, this is not a new conversation. Anytime anybody's like Delver, the Delver shell has been the issue for getting cards banned. From all the way from Treasure Cruise to Ren 6 to like the side, like all the companions.
I would venture to say that as good as Ren 6 was in that shell, it didn't need to be in Delver to get itself banned. Like, the fact that it existed in a format with Wasteland was enough to get it banned.
I'm saying that even like the Delver shell itself has been the most powerful thing to be doing and cause every ban that has happened like over a decade, so much so that Delver has also dictated which other decks are actually playable at competitive events. So when Wrenn and 6 was legal, the best deck in the format was Storm, because Storm didn't care about Wrenn and 6 Delver because they had a bunch of Gruul cards.
They
in
don't
their
need
deck.
lands.
When Ragavan was legal, one of the best decks in the format was D&T. Because they didn't care about a 2-1 monkey on the ground. Like, it's not like a nod to those decks being powerful.
Yeah.
It's a nod to those decks being powerful positionally
good
against
the
the deck
time,
that's
yeah.
actually good. Like, the deck that's actually powerful is the one that people need to worry about. And then those happen to just naturally be the best positioned decks against how Delver is built in that current format.
So here's my question then. Do you think that a format version of what of the opposite of what this is exists for you? Like, I don't think there is a format where Delver in at least tempo style decks aren't a deck. Like that's what we're looking at here.
I think that assuming that Force of Will can't go anywhere because it's a check on the format, assuming Wasteland can't go anywhere because it's a check on the format, assuming that if you get rid of Ponder, it just gets replaced by Preordain, assuming that you're not going to get rid of Brainstorm because if any card, I fucking hate the argument that there's like an identity to the format. But if there was an identity to the format, it's Brainstorm because you can't actually play that card anywhere else, right? It's a one-of in Vintage. You can't play it in Modern. Like, it is actually distinctly a differentiating factor from the other formats that aren't just Modern Horizons 2 constructed. So
Pauper.
Pauper doesn't have fetches, so it's like, okay.
Pauper has fetches.
Anyway, I'm not. The thing is, though, is that like, if the argument is that Brainstorm is an actual untouchable the same way that Force and Wasteland are, even though it's not a format check, Ponder just gets very easily replaced by the next best cantrip, which is Preordain, which means that you'd have to just ban the entire slew of cantrips, which just seems crazy because then how do you actually calibrate what that format would look like if you're making that kind of decision in a room? You know, like, how do you possibly calibrate that?
Yeah,
so
I mean,
you could look at Modern and say like, oh yeah, Ponder and Preordain don't exist there, but then it's like, okay, well, are we just banning Legacy to make it more like Modern? And isn't that not the goal?
We don't want that. I don't think we want.
That's a whole different thing. The thing though is that none of those cards are systemic problems, right? Like, I've talked about this before, but Daze is the one card that is systemically an issue. It will always make the cheapest threat more powerful. It will always exacerbate the die roll. It will always be something that every other deck in the format, when you play something, has to be conscious to build you build your curve thinking about Daze. You play around Daze when you play. When you are on the play, the Daze is more powerful than when you're on the draw, and vice versa. Everything about Daze does not promote systemically healthy environments.
Do you think that they could...
The design of the card, that's just how it works. It's an even trade. It will always trade up on mana. And now that there are cards that enable the downside of it, right? Like, the whole argument before, when Ragavan was going, was like, oh yeah, Ragavan offsets the downside of Daze. You know what else does that now? Any powerful instant or sorcery with Mystic Sanctuary. Are you going to say that Mystic Sanctuary is the card that needs to go because Delver's adopted it and now gets to turn all of their Dazes into mystical tutors?
I think no, that's crazy, right?
But that's what I'm not like.
Wait,
I'm
all of
saying
their Dazes into mystical. Oh, okay, I gotcha. Yeah.
Do you know what I'm saying? Like every card, like if you ban Expressive Iteration, they just replace it with whatever new card draw engine is the most powerful thing to be doing. When Murktide goes, they just adopt whatever the most powerful threat is in that slot, like they've done forever, whether it's going back to Gurmag or whatever. And it's like, okay, yeah, maybe they weaken their mana base a little bit, but they're not playing any basics now. They're playing 6 Volcanic Islands and a Mystic Sanctuary. Yeah. Like, if you wanted to crush them with Wasteland, you could. Like, yeah, maybe you can cut them off a color every once in a while, but like, if you wanted to cut them off colors or not have them have access to perfect mana bases, then you got to look at fetch land.
You just play choke at that point, I think, right?
I think that like the discussion of any of the other cards, it just is everybody, including us, repeating ourselves, and you could just replace every one of those cards with every other card that has been banned since. Look at like the conversation around Ragavan, the conversation around Dreadhorde Arcanist, the conversation around Wrenn and 6, the conversation around Lurrus, the conversation around Treasure Cruise. It's all the same. Every single time, the conversation is exactly the same, and the result will likely be exactly the same. They will just replace those cards. It will continue to be the best deck.
I will concede this one point to you. If they ban Daze, I will not quit Legacy. If they banned Brainstorm, I'm fucking done. I'm over it.
Well, the thing is like if you've played anybody who's played Blue, if they ban Brainstorm, there isn't really anything to stop you from at that point. There isn't really a reason to play Legacy over Modern, because all of the powerful cards, for the most part, that are legal in Legacy now are also Modern legal, except for Uro.
Mm-hmm.
So it's but the thing is, then you also get other cards that are banned in Legacy, like you can play with Ragavan and Remnant 6 again or whatever. But there isn't, if you ban Ponder Brainstorm, which at the same time I don't think anything should be left off the table. I think you do whatever's healthiest for the format. But Brainstorm actually is a differentiating factor between the formats. So if you wanted to be you can play with Brainstorm in Legacy, which you can't do in Modern, but in Modern you can play with the Modern Horizons 2 cards. It's okay, at least there is some differentiating factor there. Is Brainstorm too powerful? Yes, obviously it's objectively too powerful. That's not a secret. There are a lot of problems. The thing is that when it comes to, if we're talking about specifically not having Delver constantly be the reason why we have to ban everything because it's S tier every time, then we can't continue banning symptoms. We have to ban part of the shell, which is Efficient Threat, Daze, Wasteland. Wasteland is a check. The threats are imminently replaceable, right? We saw Ragavan go and nothing changed. If anything, Delver got better against bad matchups.
I think another issue about the whole Delver being the best deck thing is also numbers. They're just more people play Delver, and I think that has to do with the fact that the deck itself is it's not necessarily cheap to build. It's a $4,000, $5,000 deck, but every single card in that deck is either 50 cents or it's playable in every other deck in the format.
Yeah, I also don't think that if a deck is easier or more reasonable to play, that doesn't necessarily I don't think cost or access should be a consideration for ban discussions, because they banned the most expensive card out of Modern Horizons 2 from Delver.
Sure.
In Ragavan, and the reserve list isn't going anywhere, so the format is already gate-kept by price. So the idea that price could actually have an influential factor. I
mean, I think my argument speaks the opposite of that, is that it's not so much hey, if you ban Delver, you're going to screw over my financial investment in Volcanic Islands. It's that everybody owns these 40 cards, right? And that's why they're playing Delver, is because even if Delver gets banned, they can then be well, I guess I'll just play 8 cast like I did. I kept my Force of Wills when I sold all my cards, and I'm okay, well I can play 8 cast because I own Force of Wills. That's a good portion of the deck, it's the old I think Reed Duke a long time ago when I was getting into Legacy wrote an article about, do you want to buy Lion's Eye Diamonds or do you want to buy Force of Wills? Right. And that's going to determine the sort of Legacy player you are, right? Because you're able to take those cards and move them into different decks. And I think that's a big factor when we're determining why Delver is the most played deck, why its percentage in the format is X. Because sure, I could go out and buy a bunch of Thalias and stuff, but I can't port Thalias over to 5 other decks. Whatever, Caracas, name the most expensive card in some other deck and be how many other decks can that be played in? If the answer isn't Force of Will and Wasteland, right? What is it? After fetch lands, and duels, right?
I'm with you on it. I just don't think that I don't think that card crossover, card cost, or any of that is something that can realistically be considered when it comes to.
But I think it does get considered.
Make the format healthier, quote unquote.
Yeah, I mean, to make the format healthier, no, but I think it does get considered. Just because if that was the case, they would have banned fetch lands and made this format an eternal, what's it called? They'd have got rid of the whole reserve list, and been okay, everybody can now play with their things.
I agree. At that point, though, then they just make new formats that don't have those things, right?
I mean, we tried that.
I agree that they're busted, but if there's a difference between banning a card and overhauling the format.
Yeah.
Now, if they were to, at this point, there are so many cards that if they were to overhaul the format, they would just make a new format.
Yeah. I mean, we've already proven that you don't even need Delver to play Delver, right? Like, Ragavan was proof of that. We could just choose the third best creature, you know?
Delver's interchangeable.
Yeah.
I'm just saying that, like, as the community builds back up to make more noise for another ban on WotC following up, recognizing that, like, Blue-Red Delver is still, like, public enemy number 1 or whatever, that if we can, like, here's the thing. If WotC and the community is just happy to continue having this conversation for the rest of forever by just constantly banning whatever the newest symptom is that is absorbed by the shell, and then incidentally punishing other decks that were also using those tools, if that's just what we want what the format is going to be, and the majority and WotC are okay with that, okay, but then state that. Like, let us know that is clear. That, like, when I asked Gavin, excuse me, when I asked Gavin on Twitter, I was like, are cards like Ponder and Daze untouchable? He hedged and said it's not his space in WotC. Like, he's not part of that team.
I would say the same thing.
But he also said that nothing is off the table, theoretically, which is also a hedge.
Yeah,
right?
of
Because
course.
it means that, like, they're not making a public statement one way or the other. And I think that as long as that's the case, as long as there isn't a definitive, like, barring the most egregious of circumstances with an example of what that might look like, these cards are the pillars of legacy that we will never touch the same way we will never touch the reserve list. And until we have something like that, you have to keep looking back at the systemic cards that cause all these problems, one of which is Daze.
Yeah.
If you don't do that, then you're voluntarily overlooking the actual cancer and just trying to get rid of your runny nose.
Well, before we go too far down that rabbit hole, we'll take a moment, take a breath, and let's quickly talk about MoxField. So most of you know that MoxField is a sponsor of the podcast. They've been helping us, make the updates, make the video look better, make the sound quality look better. We got this spinning background thing here because I had the time to set aside because of the extra cash flowing in from MoxField and from our Patreons. So let's quickly talk about MoxField. MoxField is a amazing deck building website. You should definitely check it out. It's a great place for legacy deck lists, to share your deck lists. Great place for Commander if you're into that as well. And it's just all around a really cool website, and you can use it on your phone. You don't need an app for it. And yeah, I think, just a heads up. Go to moxfield.com and check that out.
Check out MoxField.
All right, let's get back into talking about Daze.
Here's another example. So if we're like, okay, Phil, what are the other examples of systemically problematic cards, as opposed to just cards that are powerful that then prove to be too good? Urza Saga, obviously too powerful, but it is an example of a card that will be systemically problematic, the same way that Daze is, once there's enough cards that exacerbate it to the point where it's just the best thing to be doing.
I certainly look at every time a 1-mana artifact comes out now, I'm like, okay, this is fine.
So here's the thing. Like, when you are building a deck, when you're building your deck, you have to be thinking about Daze because it's part of the best deck, right? And if the best deck in the format is going to be guaranteed at a tournament with stakes in it at 30+%, and you're like, okay, well, statistically, I'm going to run into a Daze deck, whether it's Delver or Doomsday, at least twice. Statistically, twice.
Yep.
And that means that if I don't have a good matchup, or if I lose to a Daze deck, I get that they need different tools to beat both of them, but I have to consider Daze in both. If I lose twice, I can no longer win that event.
Correct.
Okay. So now the format is going to be warped by that card. If Urza Saga has enough homes beyond just 8 cast, and then it is played at the same percentage, you could theoretically swap everything that we've said about Daze for Urza Saga, in that, okay, well, if I can't beat Urza Saga the same way that, or if I have to contort my deck to consider Urza Saga at least this many times in a tournament the same way that I do Daze, then if we're like, oh, we'll just ban Retrofitter Foundry. Oh, just get rid of Shadow Spear. And it's like, that would be the equivalent of being like, get rid of Murktide. Get rid of Expressive Iteration. Like, yes.
I mean, they've made bans for that reason before, right? We've had stuff like that that's just like, okay, well, if we keep running into this problem, it doesn't make sense to ban anything but the thing that makes everything else a problem, right?
Yes, it's.
I'm trying to think of the last thing that happened.
I get like the idea of compare. Like I get that. Like it sounds crazy. The idea of comparing fucking Retrofitter Foundry to Murktide Region is just like the weirdest comparison. The thing is that that's like Murktide is good because of the shell that it's in, right? Like Murktide has not showed up in any other reasonable decks other than Sagavan when it was legal, in which case it was just abusing all of the cards together because Ragavan tied the room together. But it was still a Delver. It was still a Daze Wasteland deck backed by free counter magic, and Blue-Red Delver. That's it. That's it.
And Death Shadow.
And Death Shadow, a Daze deck, or Tempo Doomsday, which is like just using it as a pivot, not a plan.
So here's my issue, right? Is that if you and this is bad logic, but I do want to put it out there. What happened to a lot of the format let's give it 12% of the format when we banned Sensei's Divining Top? Those decks couldn't even exist anymore.
Yeah, Miracles like became synonymous with like control decks, but like actual like miracle, like play pattern miracle control.
I'm not talking about miracles. I'm talking about decks like Doomsday at the time and Painter. Those decks got really bad for a very long time, and they're only now starting to kind of come back. And maybe this is part of that. Like this is the push and pull of that.
Painter has come back entirely and solely on the back of Urza Saga.
Yeah, for sure.
Let's not kid ourselves that like.
I mean, that's
the Painter part of the deck is good.
That leads into that point.
Part of the deck is good.
Yeah, that leads into that point. Is like now we've created another monster. You know, and look, I'm currently playing Urza Saga. I'm also currently playing Daze, not in the same deck. I love both those cards, and I think I'm more worried about the longevity of Urza Saga after like 2 or 3 years than I am worried about. I don't think they're gonna get rid of Daze.
Well, I'm saying that as here's like to reiterate the argument that I'm making is not that like Daze or Urza Saga or whatever like should explicitly have to go. I'm saying that those cards are examples of systemically problematic cards that will continue and remain to be problems as more cards get printed and adopted into the format. They will always be the things that are causing the problems. The power level on cards that they print are just going to be powerful cards, but it doesn't necessarily mean that powerful cards would be the problem. The systemically problematic cards are the ones that are pushing it over the edge, and examples of those kinds of cards are Daze and Urza Saga. So that's where I'm saying like the idea of what needs to go, people clashing like what is the card that actually needs to go. That's where I go, we need to have a target as to what we want the format to be. If we say Legacy is a home and should be a home for systemically powerful problematic cards because those cards should have a place where players can play them, then expressly say we are never touching these cards. Here's a list of cards that will never be touched, and we will continuously add cards to that list that will never be touched, barring some extraneous circumstance, and then giving an example of what that circumstance might be.
So if they do that, before you continue on that point, if they do that, that means that they need to start printing answers to those kinds of cards. They can do that, but they're going to have to print stuff. They're going to have to. It becomes a nuclear nuclear power race.
You have the issue where they at one point they did that they expressly did that.
Yeah.
Before they banned Top for counterbalance, they printed Abrupt Decay, and Aaron Forsyth said that in design they designed Abrupt Decay specifically to get rid of counterbalance.
What a bunch of idiots.
That's not like that.
I believe you.
They expressly designed Abrupt Decay to get rid of counterbalance. I'm not making
my
that
dudes.
It's just, and that's fine.
Put split second on
it.
It's the
same
thing.
thing.
Like what's wrong?
Well, here's the thing. Here's the thing, guys. It's the even if they wanted to print cards to beat the cards that are issues for people in a format, answers are never going to be as good as the best thing to do.
Yeah, agreed. That was the issue with Death Right
do the thing that beats the best thing.
Yeah, that was always the issue with Death Right.
Do the best thing, then beat the death thing. Yeah, trying to beat the best thing will never be as good as just doing the best thing.
Yeah. Well, one of the reasons is because let's say you crush all the decks that play Death Right Shaman because your deck is built to beat Death Right Shaman. You still lose to the other 70% of the meta, right?
Yeah, you're gonna lose to the other stuff. It is one of those things where it's like you may go into an event and never run into any of these cards, right? Like it's totally theoretically possible that you will just dodge all of it and run into Uro 9 times in an event. Who knows? Yeah. I don't know. But like that's irrelevant, right? Like the idea here is like the data supports. These are the numbers for the decks that are seeing play at the top level, what you are likely to run into, because those are the things that are going to impact your deck building decision, assuming that you have the capacity to move between decks as you see fit for events that you're playing in. So I think, like, for the most part, I feel like I've said where my argument, where I stand on all of it. It's just like, if you actually want to make a realistic change and not just be having the same conversation every 3 months, you have to go after the systemically problematic cards.
Yeah.
Until you do that, you're just putting a Band-Aid on the wound and never actually treating it. Yeah. And if you want, and it's totally fine. Like, it is totally fine if you want to just continuously replace the bandage. Like, if that's what you want to do, that's okay. But you have to make that explicitly clear, because otherwise everybody in the community will just continue to badger you about how there needs to be something to fix the problem. The thing is that we are assuming that this is a problem because you haven't told us that isn't a problem.
Yeah.
Because that's just part of, like, Mishra's Workshop in Vintage just gets to exist forever, right?
Yeah, it's unspoken, but we're pretty positive they're not getting rid of that card.
Well, also, like Aaron Forsyth with transgressive cards need a place to live. It's like, okay, if Mishra's Workshop is explicitly never getting touched, then we as a community go, okay, unless there's an overwhelming majority of people that are like, wait a minute, no, WotC, you can't do, none of us actually want that. Then we can all change our conversation going, instead of being like, guys, we need to fucking ban Daze, we need to look at like the systemic problems of the format. If they're just like, Daze is untouchable no matter what happens, then I will go, oh, part of talking about the format and what it needs, can't talk about this topic because that is decided. So, therefore, what can we actually do? And at which point, if that's the case, then you can look at cards like the newest power level thing that Delver has just adopted, whether it's Expressive or Murktide or whatever. But until then, you got to look at the systemic problems, and if you're not going to do that, then you're just willingly looking over the actual problems. So
your point is there are no sacred cows.
I'm saying if there are sacred cows,
we need to know
beyond Force of Will and Wasteland. You have to explicitly say it, write it somewhere, acknowledge it, embrace it,
and point to it every time someone says you should ban this. You're like, no, look,
and back it up with your decision making, and be like, these are the untouchable pillars. Because and really, what that's doing is it's actually articulating what the identity of the format is.
Yeah.
I hate the argument it's the format's identity, because there's no such thing. There could be.
There could definitely
if they said what it was.
Yeah. All right.
But until they do that.
Yeah. So I'll agree with you on that point. I think there's a lot that needs to change. And I think to your point, if WotC just stepped up and said this is how the format is, we would have a much better idea of what actually needs to change.
We would actually be able to have a conversation where we're all looking at the same goal.
Yeah.
We're looking at the same target. We're not all looking at a bunch of different potential targets and trying to figure out how to best get to the target that we're looking at.
Yeah.
We would all at least be having the same conversation.
All right. Well, I think that does it for us this week. Then we've made some points. Hopefully you're thinking a little bit better about where the format lies, and you have a little bit better idea of what you think should change. Real quick.
Yeah, that is one thing. Like, I get that I'm pretty hard and fast in my my thoughts on this. Like, it is. I still am interested in hearing what other people think on the topic, because for the most part, from at least the conversation that I've had, whether it's on the podcast, on Twitter, like, in other chats, for the most part, I recognize I'm in the minority here. You know, most people are on in the same headspace as you are from the beginning of the episode, where you're like, "Don't touch Daze, that'd be crazy."
I mean, I still don't want them to touch Daze.
Yeah, no, but I'm saying that, like, I feel as, at least my personal experience is that more people are in that headspace than they are in my headspace. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well,
Anyway.
I mean, with that said, I think we should thank our Patreon supporters.
Yes.
Thanks so much. You know, obviously we've got a much better look and a much better sound now, and that is partially thanks to you guys. If you want to join the club at patreon.com/Eternal Durdles, please do. If you want to join our Discord, that's below. We've got some sick merch. You can pick up.
Get those fanny packs though.
Hold
For real.
on. I'm gonna get the fanny pack real fast. Here we go. I'm gonna grab it.
Like, yeah, you know, you're all going. They're starting GPs back up and command vests back up, and you need a fanny pack to hold like your dice bag and stuff.
Look at this.
Like, you don't want to be having to dig through.
Look at this
dice,
fanny
or,
pack,
like,
guys.
You know, rolling your dice out onto the table every single time you need something, or like pulling it out of the drawer in your box. Just have a nice little fanny pack. Have some snacks.
Here we go. Got your dice. Boom.
Get your
Pop it
dice,
back in
got your
there.
snacks.
You got a little thingy in there. Yeah, it's great. And there's a bag inside the bag, guys. Look. What?
You got swag. You got fashion.
It's got a pocket on the back.
You're taking Magic the Gathering and making it fashion.
Yeah, dude. Come on. Everybody needs an Eternal Durdles fanny pack, and they're better now because I've got the shadowing on the new ones. So, you know, you're losing money by not buying this, as we said earlier in the episode.
Yeah, can't afford to not get that.
Can't afford to not buy it. Anyhow, thanks so much for listening, and we will see you all next week.
Cheers, everybody.
Hey, thank you for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Check out this other video, and if you can, please support us on patreon.com.